It begins in the hour when the Vatican forgets it is watched. Before dawn, when Rome is reduced to breath and stone, Pope Leo XIV enters his private study expecting nothing more than the day's first silence. The room is exactly as he left it, the doors sealed, shutters locked, no sign of disturbance. Except for the envelope. It rests at the precise center of his desk, aligned with the grain of the wood, as if placed by someone who understood ritual better than security. No seal of state. No courier mark. No name. The paper is faintly damp, carrying the weight of Roman humidity that never reaches this room. His secretary pauses behind him. He does not speak at first. He does not need to. The presence of the thing says enough. When Leo lifts the envelope, the sensation is wrong. The paper is too thin. Too old. A scent escapes, incense, but not the kind burned now. Something older. Something remembered rather than used. The handwriting is elegant and unsteady, written in dark brown ink that has pressed too deeply into the fibers. Across the front are words that resemble protocol without belonging to it. Add some custodom. To the highest keeper. Leo does not recognize the title. That alone unsettles him. Inside is not a threat, but a plea written with the urgency of someone who knows time is already collapsing. Do not open the vault beneath the apostolic archives. The lock is failing. What lies there does not belong to the living. The message is signed with a name the Vatican insists never existed. Father Aurelio Neri. The air in the room tightens. Leo knows the name. Not because it is recorded, but because it is missing. An archivist who vanished in 1985. No death. No transfer. No trace. His office is sealed. His name was struck from every ledger that once held it. Erased, not forgotten. Leo turns the paper over. Embedded in the fibers is a watermark, papal, unmistakable, and reversed, as if the letter had been pressed from the inside of another document. The ink shows no decay. No age. No obedience to time. Beneath the visible message, another line flickers faintly into view, written as if added later by a hand that no longer holds a pen. I heard the voice again. Only one vault beneath the Vatican fits the warning. Only one was sealed without witnesses. Only one was closed without explanation. Archivum tenebris. And as Leo locks the letter away, the bells of St. Peter's, silent at this hour for generations, release a single, low chime into the dark. Not a call. A test. The warning, Leo realizes, did not arrive in time. Something beneath the Vatican has already begun to remember. Quick moment, subscribe now. It helps the channel grow and guarantees you never miss the next release. The Vatican did not lose Father Aurelio Neri. It removed him. That distinction mattered more than Leo XIV wanted to admit. Loss implied failure, misplaced files, forgotten corridors, human error folded into time. Removal required intent. Hands. Orders spoken quietly enough to leave no echo. Leo stood alone in his study long after the letter was locked away, the room unchanged yet subtly diminished, as though something essential had been taken from it. The walls bore the same frescoes. The desk held the same documents. But the space no longer felt neutral. It felt aware. He did not summon anyone immediately. Power, he had learned, should pause before it reacts. Only when the eastern windows began to pale did he call for Monsignor Petro. The secretary entered with practiced reverence, but Leo saw the tension beneath it. Petro's eyes moved instinctively to the desk, then away, as if the envelope might still be there, watching. "You recognize the name," Leo said. Petro hesitated. "Not at first. Only the feeling. As if I had been warned not to remember." "That is not imagination," Leo replied. "That is training." He ordered the retrieval of Father Aurelio Neri's personnel records, not from the active registry, but from the deep archival redundancies, the places where forgotten things were meant to survive bureaucracy itself. Petro's expression tightened. "Holiness," he said carefully, "those requests will leave a trace." "Good," Leo answered. "Let whoever buried him know I am digging." The response came faster than expected. By mid-morning, Petro returned carrying nothing at all. "No files," he said. "No photograph. No ordination record. No payroll entries. Not even a termination notice." Leo waited. "There is absence," Petro continued. "Where his name should be, there is blank space. In several ledgers, entire pages have been removed. In others, ink has been scraped away so thoroughly the parchment thins." "How many systems?" Leo asked. "All of them." That was when certainty arrived. The Vatican did not forget Father Aurelio Neri. It executed him administratively, without blood, without funeral, without martyrdom. A man erased so completely that even memory learned to avert its eyes. Leo dismissed Petro and began the more difficult work, asking questions no one wanted to answer. The archivists he summoned were elderly men, chosen not for rank but for longevity. They entered the chamber one by one, bowed, and spoke softly, as if sound itself were monitored. They remembered Aurelio, but only obliquely. Not his face. Not his voice. Only his habits. His tendency to linger. His questions. "He read too slowly," one said. "He asked why certain confessions were never indexed," said another. "He listened when the shells whispered," a third muttered before crossing himself. That was the phrase that broke the room. Leo pressed them gently, relentlessly, until the night of the disappearance surfaced like a body rising on its own. June 16, 1985. Aurelio had been assigned to inspect seals beneath the apostolic archives, routine verification, accompanied by 2 Swiss guards. The guards returned at dawn. Aurelio did not. They were found asleep at their post, standing upright, eyes open. Neither could recall descending. Neither could remember ascending. Both were quietly reassigned within a week. Neither spoke of the incident again. Only one object was recovered. The cross lay wrapped in cloth when it was brought to Leo. Silver once, now blackened, warped as though softened by impossible heat. It was heavier than it should have been, pulling against his palm with an insistence that felt almost intentional. On its back, a date had been etched with surgical precision. June 16, 1985. When Leo tilted the metal beneath the light, words shimmered briefly, then faded, visible only at a specific angle, as if the truth required cooperation to appear. He is not gone. He is beneath. Leo closed his hand around the cross. That afternoon, he summoned the prefect of the Apostolic Archives. The man arrived pale, already defeated, as though the summons itself had answered the question. "You know why I called?" Leo said. "Yes," the prefect replied. "And I beg you not to proceed." Fear, Leo noted, was still the most honest confession. "The Church cannot fear what it buried," Leo said. "Tell me about the vault." The prefect swallowed. Archivum Tenebris was sealed under papal order. No witnesses. No secondary exits. No duplication of contents. It was containment. Of what? Memory, the man said, and then stopped speaking altogether. The descent began before nightfall. Stone gave way to older stone. Air cooled. Sound thickened. Leo felt the Vatican above him not as weight, but as pressure, layers of prayer, silence, denial compacted into architecture. The door waited at the end of the corridor, black iron, unadorned, marked only by a phrase engraved deep enough to survive centuries. Veritas non dormit. Truth does not sleep. When Leo turned the key, the door did not swing. It yielded. Slowly. Inward. As if something on the other side had been holding it closed, and had finally let go. Cold air rushed out, extinguishing the lantern flame. A dim phosphorescence rose from the chamber beyond, illuminating a circular room lined with shelves that held sealed jars, boxes, and numbered ash. At the center stood an altar, and upon it, a book. Leather-bound. Unmarked. Bearing the same symbol found on Aurelio's cross. Leo approached. The pages were blank until they weren't. Words surfaced beneath the glow, forming dated entries from decades past. Confessions never spoken. Decisions are never admitted. Truths locked away not because they were false, but because they were dangerous. Then a new line appeared. Written now. You opened it again. The door slammed shut. Fresh ink bloomed across the iron behind them. The keeper has returned. 3 knocks sounded from the other side. A voice spoke Leo's name and warned him not to speak it back. When they escaped the vault hours later, the Vatican above them had changed. The letter rewrote itself inside a locked drawer. Bells rang 13 times at midnight. Ink moved without hands. Memory leaked into stone, bronze, paper, and oath. And that was when Aurelio appeared, not as a monster, but as a witness burned into permanence. I will write your name next, he said. Leo understood then what Archivum Tenebris truly was. Not a prison. A reckoning. And it had been waiting for a pope brave enough, or foolish enough, to listen. Leo did not sleep. He remained in the study long after Petro withdrew, long after the household corridors quieted into their monastic rhythm. The letter sat locked away, yet its presence seemed to seep through wood and metal as if confinement were only a suggestion. By morning, the Vatican had returned to its rituals, doors opening, feet moving, schedules unfolding. But Leo felt the machinery differently now. Like a choir that had learned to sing around a missing note and called it harmony. He summoned Petro again. "Retrieve the records," Leo said. "Not just from the registry. From the redundancies. From the old ledgers. The backups of the backups." Petro's throat moved as he swallowed. "Holiness, we all ready?" Again, Leo said, with a calm that left no room for argument. "And do it openly." The request traveled down the administrative spine of the church like a scalpel. It returned hours later as a wound. Petro entered carrying nothing. "No files," he said. "No photograph. No employment history. Not even a misfiled reference. It's as if the archive rejects his name. How does a man vanish from paperwork without a trace?" Leo asked. Petro's gaze dropped. "Only two ways. Fire. Or order." Then it was order. Petro hesitated, then spoke with the careful precision of someone choosing words that would not summon consequences. In 3 separate staff ledgers from the 1980s, the page numbers skip. Entire sheets removed. In one index, his name appears in the alphabetical tabbing, but the line beneath is scraped so hard the parchment has thinned. Leo felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Not fear, something older. Recognition. They didn't want him dead, Leo said. They wanted him impossible. Petro nodded once, very slightly, as if even agreement should be quiet. Leo rose and crossed to the window. Beyond the glass, Rome glimmered under winter light, beautiful, indifferent. The Vatican stood within it like a locked reliquary. What the church hid, it hid well. But it had not buried everything. "Bring me witnesses," Leo said. "What kind?" "The kind who have survived long enough to remember," Leo replied. "And are frightened enough to pretend they don't." By evening, they came. Old archivists, men whose hands trembled not from age alone but from long obedience. They entered the study with bowed heads and lowered voices, glancing at corners as though listening for confession itself to become audible. Leo did not press them at first. He offered them tea. Silence. The rare mercy of being spoken to as humans, not tools. Then he asked, gently, "Do you remember Father Aurelio Neri?" They reacted the way a body reacts to pain, before thought, before language. One man crossed himself without realizing. Another stared at his own hands as if they had betrayed him. A third gave a laugh that held no humor and died quickly in his throat. "You do remember him," Leo said. A pause. The room held its breath. "He was diligent," an archivist finally whispered. "He was curious," another admitted, as if confessing a sin. "What did he ask?" Leo said. No answer. Leo leaned forward. "Tell me what he asked, and I will carry the guilt for hearing it." That loosened something. "He asked why some confessions were sealed without being catalogued," one man said. "He asked why certain testimonies had no origin record. He asked why entire events were described only in margins, like someone didn't want them to be findable. He spoke of whispers, said another, eyes glassy. Not voices like madness. Whispers like paper settling at night, except it sounded like language. What language? Leo asked. The archivist's mouth tightened. Scripture. But wrong. Like scripture translated through too many mouths. Verses in tongues nobody here admitted to knowing. Petro stood near the door, still as stone. Leo felt the study's air shift as if the walls were leaning in to listen. And the night he vanished. Leo asked. At once, their gaze dropped, unanimous. The oldest of them spoke, voice thin as vellum. June 16, 1985. It came out like a date carved into a grave. He went down to verify seals, the man continued. Routine. 2 guards accompanied him. Swiss. Young. Unshakable, people said. And at dawn, the guards returned, the archivist said. Standing upright at their post. Eyes open. Sleeping. Sleeping. Petro breathed, forgetting himself. The archivist nodded once. They woke hours later and could not remember descending. Could not remember ascending. Could not remember the corridor. Only the cold. And Aurelio? Leo asked. Silence. He didn't return, the archivist said, almost inaudible. Not as a body. Not as a rumor. Not as a file. The Vatican handled it the way it handles anything that threatens the illusion of permanence. How? Leo asked. The archivist looked up then, and there was something in his eyes like apology. They erased him. When the men were dismissed, Leo remained seated long after the door closed. Outside, somewhere in the distance, bells announced the hour, normal, properly timed, properly sanctioned. Leo touched the locked drawer where the letter had been placed earlier, as though proximity itself could draw out meaning. His mind kept circling one phrase like a tongue worrying a broken tooth. The lock is failing. That night, the prefect of the archives arrived when summoned, sweating under his robes despite the cold. He did not bother with pleasantries. You should not involve yourself in this, the prefect said, voice strained. Holiness, I beg you. Leo studied him. You're not afraid of me? No, the man whispered, and the admission was the most honest thing he could have said. I'm afraid of what you're about to touch. Leo placed the letter on the desk between them, not opened, just present. I have already been touched, Leo said. Tell me what was sealed. The prefect's eyes flicked to the drawer as if expecting it to breathe. There is a chamber, he said. Beneath the apostolic archives. Sealed under papal order. Leo waited. The prefect swallowed. Archivum Tenebris. The name felt like ash on the tongue. It was created without secondary exits, the prefect continued, hating each word he spoke. No alternate corridors. No emergency release. It was designed like a tomb. For what? Leo asked. The prefect's mouth opened, closed. Finally, for things the church could not destroy, and could not afford to remember. Leo stood. The decision was already made. He could feel it in his bones, as if the letter had merely awakened what duty demanded. "The Church cannot fear what it buried," he said. The prefect's hand shook. "Holiness." Leo's voice remained gentle, and somehow that gentleness carried the weight of a verdict. "Take me to it." The descent began before midnight. Leo refused procession, refused ceremony. Only Petro and the prefect accompanied him, and even then, it felt less like an escort than like witnesses being compelled to attend their own trial. They moved through corridors that were not on public plans, down stairwells that narrowed as if the stone itself resented passage. The air changed first, cooler, thicker, carrying the mineral taste of ancient walls. Then sound changed. Footsteps softened. Breath became loud. Even prayer felt intrusive, like speaking in a library where something sleeps. At the final landing, the corridor ended in iron. The door was enormous, black with age, its surface scarred by time and handled by too many gloved hands. A single phrase had been cut into it so deeply it seemed part of the metal skeleton. Veritas non dormit. Truth does not sleep. Petro's lips moved, but no words came. The prefect held out a key as if offering a relic he wished to be rid of. Leo took it. The lock turned with resistance, not mechanical resistance, but something that felt like reluctance. Like a throat deciding whether to swallow. And then the door moved. Not outward, not with the natural swing of hinges, but inward, slowly, as if something beyond had caught it and was drawing it open with patient strength. A rush of air spilled out, so cold it stole the breath from Leo's lungs. The lantern flame Petro carried snapped out instantly, leaving them in darkness until the darkness began to glow. A phosphorescent wash rose from within the chamber, pale and steady, as if light had been stored there for centuries and was now being released. They stepped through. The room was circular. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, packed with sealed jars and boxes bound in cords. Some containers were labeled with numbers rather than names. Others bore only wax stamps, older than Leo's own papacy, older than the language of modern caution. Between the shelves were niches filled with ash, each pile contained as carefully as a saint's bones. At the center stood an altar, and on it lay a leather-bound book. It was not ornate. It did not glitter. It did not beg to be admired. It simply waited, like a mouth closed around a secret. Leo approached. The cover bore a symbol that made Leo's stomach tighten, a small cross within a circle, simple enough to be dismissed as generic, but placed with intent, like a mark left by someone who expected to be recognized. He opened the book. Blank pages. Petro exhaled a fragile sound, half relief, half disbelief. The prefect's shoulders sagged. Then the pages began to change. Letters surfaced slowly, as if ink were rising from beneath the paper rather than being laid upon it. Lines formed with measured patience. The handwriting was careful, pressed deep, like a man writing while his hands shook. Dates appeared. June 16, 1985. Leo's pulse tightened. The entry described seals. Cold. The sensation of being watched by something older than stone. It spoke of truth stored here not as documents, but as burdens. Confessions bury because admitting them would fracture the Church's image of itself. Then, further down the page, a sentence appeared that made Petro stumble back. I tried to seal it forever, and for that I was erased. If this reaches you, the lock is failing. Leo's fingers tightened on the book's edge. A new line appeared beneath the old one, fresh ink, wet with impossible immediacy. You opened it again. The words were not written for history. They were written for now. Behind them, iron screamed. The door slammed shut with a force that did not belong to hinges. Petro rushed to it, pulling, pushing, futile. The metal did not yield. It sat in place with the finality of a tomb. And then, across the iron surface, ink bloomed as if the door were paper. Letters spread in dark, deliberate strokes, forming a sentence that was not carved, not engraved, but written, alive in its movement. The keeper has returned. The chamber's cold deepened, tightening around their skin. The phosphorescent light seemed to lean inward, focusing them like a gaze. 3 knocks sounded from the other side of the door. Slow. Measured. Not the frantic pounding of a trapped man. The polite insistence of someone who believed they had the right to enter. Petro's voice cracked. Who is there? Silence. Leo stepped closer to the door. He did not know why. Only that something inside him recognized the etiquette of this moment. Answer the question you have been asked. He spoke softly. Aurelio. At once, a voice replied, muffled by iron, yet intimate enough to raise hairs along Leo's arms. Do not speak my name again. Petro's face went pale. Holiness. I am not a ghost, the voice said, and there was sorrow in it, heavy, restrained, disciplined. I am what remains when you refuse to remember. Leo closed his eyes. He understood then, not as theory but as living fact, the vault was not storage. It was memory. And memory, once confined, did not become harmless. It became hungry. Somehow, through mechanisms Leo could not name and would not pretend to understand, the door released them hours later, not with mercy, but with dismissal. As if the chamber had learned what it wanted and allowed them to leave so it could continue working elsewhere. They returned to the papal apartments in near silence. Leo ordered the letter secured again, this time in a locked drawer within a locked cabinet within a room guarded by men who had sworn oaths on their own bones. It did not matter. Near midnight, Petro entered the study, face drained of color. Holiness, he whispered. The drawer. Leo crossed the room. The cabinet stood locked. The drawer within was locked. Yet the letter lay atop the desk, unfolded, its paper flat as if freshly placed. And the ink, God held them, the ink had shifted. New lines had appeared, laid over the old message like a correction. Not a rewrite made by human hands, but by something that treated paper as a medium, not an object. Outside, the bells of St. Peter's rang. Once. Twice. Leo's breath caught. Petro counted under his breath like a man reciting a prayer he no longer believed would protect him. 13 times. At midnight. The final chime lingered too long, vibrating in the stone as if the basilica itself had become an instrument for something underneath it. On the desk, the ink moved. Not flowing like spilled liquid, but crawling, forming, unforming, shaping letters with the careful intention of thought. Leo stared, and the terror was not that it was happening. The terror was that it felt like language returning to its rightful owner. When the air in the room thickened, Leo looked up. A man stood near the far wall, half in shadow, as if the darkness had decided to take the shape of a witness. He was not monstrous. He was burned. His skin looked scorched in patterns that resembled writing, lines and curves like scripture pressed into flesh. His eyes held a grief too deep for performance, too old for malice. Petro made a sound and stepped back instinctively, crossing himself. The man lifted a hand, not in threat, but in a gesture of restraint, as if even appearing took effort. "I did not die," he said. Leo's voice came out steadier than he expected. "Father Aurelio." Aurelio's expression tightened at the name, but he did not correct him. He only looked tired, tired the way stone must be tired of holding weight. "They didn't kill me," Aurelio said. "They used me." "For what?" Leo asked. Aurelio's gaze flicked to the letter, to the moving ink, to the room itself, as though the walls were now participants. "To keep it contained," he said. "To give it a custodian. To give it a voice that could be blamed on a man instead of an institution." Leo felt the truth assemble in him piece by piece, each one heavy. "The vault," Leo said. Aurelio nodded once. "Archivum tenebris is not a room. It is what accumulates when you bury truth for centuries and call it protection." "What is it?" Petro whispered, almost pleading. Aurelio's eye softened at Petro, not kindness, but pity. "It is the Church's suppressed memory," Aurelio said. "Confessions sealed. Crimes renamed. Testimonies hidden. The things you told yourselves were too dangerous for the faithful. It learned the shape of what you refused to say." Leo swallowed. "And now it's waking." "It has been awake," Aurelio replied quietly. "It has simply been contained." Aurelio stepped closer. The air cooled with him, as if the room recognized his presence like a key returning to a lock. "I tried to seal it forever," he said. "And they erased me for it. But you can't erase what's written into stone. You can't erase what's been prayed over. You can't erase what's been swallowed whole." Leo held his gaze. "Why warn me?" Aurelio's mouth tightened, and for the first time anger flared, not wild, but disciplined, like a priest refusing to forgive the unrepentant. "Because it's learned something new," Aurelio said. "It has learned that it doesn't need to stay beneath you." Leo felt his throat go dry. Aurelio looked past him, as if he could already see the future unfolding in ink across the Vatican's bones. "I will write your name next." And then the light in the room shifted, subtly, like a page turning. Aurelio was gone. But the letter remained. And the ink did not stop moving. Aurelio was gone. But the letter remained. And the ink did not stop moving. By morning, the Vatican felt less like a city-state and more like a body fighting fever. Doors opened and closed too quickly. Footsteps multiplied in corridors that had once carried only measured silence. Men who had spent their lives mastering composure began speaking in clip bursts, as if speed could outrun consequence. The cardinals arrived in clusters, faces drawn tight beneath scarlet. Leo did not summon them, they came because panic creates its own summons. They gathered in a private chamber whose walls held centuries of agreements made in whispers. The room smelled faintly of beeswax and polished wood, comforting scents, until Leo noticed how sharply fear cut through them. "We must contain this," one cardinal said before anyone had even Saturday. "Holiness, the letter," another began, then faltered as if the word itself were dangerous. "There will be rumors," a third said, voice thick with outrage. "Already the staff speaks of bells at midnight. 13 times. The guards." Leo listened without interrupting. Let them speak. Let them reveal what mattered most to them, not truth, but control over its timing. "We should declare a temporary retreat," someone suggested. "A private pilgrimage." A pause. "Let the air settle." "Or an investigation," another urged. "Quietly. Inwardly. Without scandal. Without scandal." The Vatican's favorite prayer. Leo finally raised his hand, and the room fell into the kind of silence that obeys authority out of instinct. "You want silence," Leo said. A cardinal bristled. "We want stability." "You want time," Leo corrected. "Time to decide what will be admitted and what will be buried." No one answered. Their eyes shifted, as if the ceiling might offer counsel. One older cardinal leaned forward, voice softer, more dangerous for its intimacy. "Holiness, you were chosen to shepherd faith, not fracture it." Leo looked at him steadily. "Faith does not fracture from truth," he said. "It fractures from the lie that truth can be sealed." A murmur moved through them like wind through dry leaves. Open confession would be catastrophic, another cardinal insisted. "For the Church. For the faithful. For the world." Leo felt the weight of that statement, how easily catastrophe was assigned to the act of speaking, never to the act of hiding. "And if we do nothing?" Leo asked. "Then we handle this internally," the cardinal said. "As we always have. As we always have." Leo's mind returned to the scraped pages. The missing ledgers. The man-made impossible. To handle internally meant to erase. To revise. To choke history until it complied. He dismissed them before the argument could become a coup. When the door closed, the chamber felt suddenly too large, like an empty cathedral after prayer has fled. Petro stood near the window, hands clasped tight enough to whiten his knuckles. "Holiness," he said quietly, "they are frightened." Leo nodded. "So am I." That admission startled Petro. Leo saw it in his eyes. The Pope crossed back into his study. The letter lay inside its locked drawer again, yet Leo could almost feel it moving, rearranging itself in the dark, rewriting not just ink but intention. Aurelio's final warning returned with the steadiness of a bell you cannot unhear. "It will write your name next." Leo sat at his desk and did not touch the drawer. He had spent his life in rooms like this, rooms built to make decisions feel holy simply because they were made beneath frescoes. He had believed, as many did, that the church's silence was a kind of discipline. Now he wondered if it was merely fear with better clothing. The choice was not complicated. It was brutal. Reveal the truth. Offer the record nothing. Let it sleep, if it still could. Preserve the church as an institution that could continue telling itself it protected faith. Or speak. Confess. Become the first pope in living memory to name the policy of silence for what it was, and accept what would follow. Because something would follow. Leo did not doubt it. Not after the door that pulled itself open. Not after the book that wrote in the present tense. Not after bells that rang without permission. He opened the drawer. The letter was unchanged, but the ink shimmered faintly, as if the words were wet beneath the surface. Leo leaned close, and he saw it, the smallest tremor, like breath. The record was not merely a thing beneath the Vatican. It was a presence learning how to travel. He stood. Petro looked up. Holiness. Leo's voice was calm. Prepare nothing, he said. Announce nothing. Tell the household staff to remain in place. And keep the cardinals away from the loggia. Petro stared. The loggia? Leo met his eyes. Yes. Understanding struck Petro's face like cold water. You can't, he whispered. Leo's expression did not change. I can, he said. And I will. By late afternoon, word spread anyway. It always did. The Vatican breathed through rumor as much as it breathed through ritual. Pilgrims began gathering in the square, drawn by instinct more than announcement, as if some subterranean bell had rung in their bones. As sunset bled into dusk, the wind rose, odd, persistent, without the scent of rain. Flags snapped sharply. The square swelled. People looked up at the apostolic palace with a hunger usually reserved for blessing. Leo changed alone. He chose plain white. No gold trim. No ceremonial mantle. No jeweled stole. Nothing that said power. Only the garment of witness. When he stepped into the corridor, Petro reached for him, then stopped, hand hovering as if touching the Pope might be the last act of protection he could offer. Holiness, he said, voice breaking, please. Leo rested a hand briefly on Petro's shoulder. The touch was simple, human. If I do not speak, Leo said, then the record will. And it will not be gentle. He moved forward. When he reached the loggia, there was no choir, no fanfare, no prelude. Only the sound of the crowd shifting, the murmur of thousands turning into one held breath. Microphones waited, unplugged by order of the cardinals, Leo later learned, as if silence could be enforced through cables. Leo stepped to the edge. And the microphones hummed anyway. A low vibration, like bees in a box, like a throat clearing. The crowd heard it. A ripple ran through them. Faces tilted upward, eyes wide. Leo looked out over the square, over the faithful, over tourists, over skeptics who came for spectacle and found themselves caught in something older than cynicism. He spoke. Not loudly. Not theatrically. The square did not need volume. It needed truth. My brothers and sisters, he said, I stand before you without ceremony because ceremony has been used too often to hide what should have been confessed. A hush fell, thick, almost physical. For centuries, Leo continued, we told ourselves silence was prudence. That withholding truth was protection. That concealment was mercy. Wind lifted his robes. It came from nowhere, circling the square in deliberate currents. But silence became policy, Leo said. And policy became habit. And habit became a wound. Somewhere behind him, within the palace walls, something throbbed, like distant bells trying to decide if they were allowed to speak. We buried truths not because they were false, Leo said, and his voice steadied into steel, but because they were costly. We sealed testimonies. We hid confessions. We erased names. The crowd shifted. A murmur rose, not of anger yet, but of recognition, the terrible relief of hearing what has always been suspected spoken aloud. And in doing so, Leo said, we did not protect faith. We protected ourselves. The microphone's hum deepened. Then, from within the basilica behind the square, the bells trembled, not ringing fully, not yet, but quivering as if struck by invisible fingertips testing bronze. Leo's gaze did not waver. I confess, he said, that the Church has hidden truth in the name of guarding the sacred. His words should have ended there. A confession, complete. But the square answered him. Not applause. Not protest. Echo. People began repeating his words in unison, first a handful, then hundreds, then thousands, like a wave finding its shape. Silence became policy. Memory became a wound. Their mouths moved with a synchronicity that had nothing to do with coordination. Their voices aligned as though tuned by an unseen hand. It was not chant. It was reflex. Leo felt the air change again, as if the Vatican itself had inhaled. He understood then, with a clarity that chilled him. The record had found its conduit. Sound. Human mouths. Witness multiplied. The bells shuddered harder. And in the center of the square, the crowd's echo did not fade. It grew. The echo continued long after Leo stepped back from the loggia. Inside the palace, corridors filled with frantic movement, officials rushing, guards asking for orders that would not come, cardinals arguing in tight circles like men trying to build walls out of air. Leo walked through them without stopping. Their panic no longer felt like authority. It felt like noise. In his study, Petro waited, pale as paper. They're calling it treason, Petro whispered. Some are calling it heresy. They want you to retract, before morning. Leo removed nothing. No ring. No cross. No vestment. He simply stood by the desk and listened. Beyond the window, the square still murmured with a strange, lingering unanimity, as though the crowd had become an instrument still vibrating from a struck note. Leo opened the drawer. The letter lay within, but it was no longer the same. The ink had shifted again. The lines had tightened, rewritten with an economy that felt almost impatient. At the bottom, Beneath Aurelio's signature, a new sentence had appeared, small, crisp, unmistakable. Witness must be complete. Leo's throat tightened. He looked at Petro. "Leave me," he said. Petro hesitated. "Holiness." "Please," Leo said, softer. "Let me be alone for what comes next." Petro's eyes shone with fear and something like grief. He bowed and withdrew. When the door closed, the study felt hollowed out, as if it were no longer a room but a page waiting to be written on. Leo sat in the chair and did not pray in words. He prayed in attention, in listening, in accepting that something larger than his will was now moving through the bones of the Vatican. The wind outside rose again, circling the palace in slow spirals. At midnight, the bells did not ring 13 times. They did not ring at all. Silence fell so suddenly that Leo felt it like a hand closing around his throat. And then he understood the record was no longer testing its voice. It was listening for his. Leo rose. He folded his outer garments carefully, as if preparing for burial. Not because he believed he would die, but because he understood the shape of ritual, and because something in him refused to let fear make him sloppy. He placed the folded white fabric on the chair. He set the papal cross beside it. He removed the ring last. The gold felt heavier than it had ever felt, as though it contained not authority but history, names, decisions, silences pressed into metal. He held it for a moment, then set it on the desk. No guard saw him leave. No camera caught him in the corridor. It was not that the Vatican's eyes failed. It was that the Vatican's eyes were no longer in charge of what could be seen. Leo descended. He moved through stairwells that should have required keys, past doors that should have resisted. Each barrier yielded with the same quiet inevitability as the vault door had yielded before, as if the stone itself had been waiting for him to stop pretending he was above it. When he reached the final corridor, the iron door stood ajar. Not wide. Just enough to admit him. Cold spilled out, gentle this time, almost inviting. A breath offered to someone who had finally agreed to inhale. Leo stepped into Archivum Tenebris alone. The chamber had changed. It was still circular, but the walls no longer looked like stone. They shimmered faintly, like parchment stretched tight over something living. Words crawled across the surface in slow, deliberate motion, lines forming in extinct alphabets, then dissolving, replaced by others. Language moved the way a mind moves, remembering, revising, refusing to stay still. The shells remained, but their contents seemed subtly rearranged, as if the chamber had reorganized itself according to a logic Leo was not permitted to understand. At the altar, the book waited. The phosphorescent glow was brighter now, not harsh, but pervasive, like dawn in a room with no windows. Leo approached and placed his hands on the leather cover. The book opened on its own. Blank pages, then letters rising, then full lines assembling with the careful patience of something that had learned to speak without a mouth. Not dated entries this time. A direct address. Keeper. Leo felt the title settle into him, not as honor, but as responsibility. He spoke aloud. His voice sounded too loud in the chamber, as if sound here mattered more. "I have confessed," Leo said. The words on the page shifted. Confession is opening. Witness is staying. Leo swallowed. His heart beat slowly, heavily, as if each beat had to be permitted. I cannot undo what was done, Leo said. I cannot restore what was erased. But I can refuse to seal it again. The room seemed to inhale. The walls crawling script quickened for a moment, then steadied, as if satisfied by his phrasing. Like a judge hearing a plea and recognizing it as sincere. Leo's mind flashed with images he had spent a lifetime avoiding, ledgers scraped empty, pages torn out, names removed not only from paper but from mouths. The Church's long belief that silence was not a lie, but a holy kind of management. He understood now what Aurelio had meant. The record was not evil. It was memory demanding accountability. And memory could not be contained forever without becoming something else. Leo lifted his hands from the book and removed the ring from his pocket. He set it on the altar with care. A symbol surrendered. A sign that he did not come to command the record. He came to join it. The chamber's glow softened, almost warm. The book's ink stilled. For the first time since Leo had opened it, the pages stopped writing. Silence fell, not oppressive, not enforced, but complete in the way a resolved chord is complete. Leo exhaled. He felt himself not fading, not dissolving, but changing, like a word being translated into a form that could not be edited. He thought, briefly, of Petro. Of the crowd. Of the cardinals clutching at control. Of Rome outside, living its ordinary life above a vault that had learned to breathe. Then the wall's writing slowed to a final, deliberate crawl, forming one last line across the open page. Not a warning. Not a threat. A conclusion. And then Leo stepped forward, into the place where the record's light was strongest, offering not his life as sacrifice, but his presence as witness. The book closed. The glow dimmed. They found the vault at dawn. The iron door stood open, quietly, as if it had never resisted. Guards entered with lanterns and shaking hands. Officials followed, faces tight with dread and disbelief. The chamber was still. The shelves were intact. The jars sealed. The ash undisturbed. At the altar, the leather-bound book lay shut. And beside it rested the papal ring. No body. No blood. No sign of struggle. Only absence, this time not imposed by bureaucracy, but chosen, final, and inexplicably peaceful. One cardinal reached for the book, fingers trembling. He hesitated, then opened it. On the cover, where there had been no title before, an inscription had appeared in dark, definitive ink. The keeper became the word. They closed the vault. Or tried to. The door did not lock. It simply rested in place, like a mouth that has finished speaking but has not forgotten how. No conclave followed. No successor was named. The world waited, not for a new pope, but for what happens when an institution built on memory can no longer control what it remembers. And in Rome, the bells remained silent. Not broken. Not seized. Simply quiet, as if the city itself were holding its breath, listening, finally, for the sound of truth that did not need permission to ring. Before you go, subscribe, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and share your thoughts.